Hi, this is Heidi Burgess. Today I'm going to continue my discussion of small-scale reconciliation, this time talking about effective conflict communication. In the last video, I explained that small-scale, bottom-up peace building and reconciliation needs to work on 5 different things, which are listed here. Today we're going to talk about number 2, how to promote effective conflict communication. Conflict communication often looks like this, or like this. People are either screaming at each other or they aren't communicating at all. In both cases, they are likely to be developing and then clinging to extremely negative images of the other, seeing them as stupid or misguided or, at best, or evil or non-human at worst. And once they have such negative images of each other, if they have broken off all communication, they're very unlikely to change those images. And if they're screaming at each other, virtually or figuratively, they will likely continue to do that too, or even escalate to violence. So one of the necessary steps for reversing that escalation and de-escalating towards reconciliation is what Guy and I, and probably others as well, call de-escalatory communication. This can be initiated by one side alone or by both sides with the help of a mediator or some other type of third party. Probably the best known and most taught forms of de-escalatory communication are iMessages and active listening. iMessages express how one feels without placing the blame on the other. For instance, one might say, "I'm disappointed we weren't able to get together last week," instead of, "You never take the time to come visit me." The second puts the other person on the defensive and will likely provoke a hostile comeback or at least hard feelings. The first lets the person know that you're disappointed, but invites them to solve the problem together. They might even say something like, "Yeah, I was disappointed too. Let's see if we can figure out a date for next week," moving towards collaborative problem solving instead of mutual hostility. iMessages can backfire, however, if you don't do them right or if the circumstances are inappropriate. One way they don't work is if they're really you messages in disguise. For instance, "I'm disappointed you didn't come visit me last week." It's still placing the blame on the other person. It's still fundamentally a you message, even though it starts with the word I. So the listener is still likely to get defensive. One can also get in trouble with iMessages when there's significant power disparities between the speaker and the listener. In these cases, for instance, when a parent is speaking to a child, the child might interpret the iMessage as suggesting that they are responsible for their parent's happiness. While equals would probably understand that they are not broadly responsible for another person's state of mind, a child might not understand that. That being said, though, being accusatory isn't good either. So a middle ground message might be best, such as, "I see you haven't been able to clean up your room yet." This starts with I, but it doesn't have a feeling included. "Could you please go do that now?" That doesn't place blame, and it isn't likely to put the child on the defensive, or make them think that they're responsible for their parent's unhappiness, if the parent is unhappy. And if they don't have a good reason why they can't do it, when treated respectfully, it's more likely that they will actually comply with the request. When we were just starting to write Beyond Intractability, we asked Community Relations Service mediator Dick Salem to write 2 essays for us, one on listening and the other on empathy, because he talked about the importance of both those things all the time. Dick suggested that he write one article about both, asserting that they were essentially the same thing. Thus, he named the article Empathic Listening, although most people call the same process active listening or reflective listening. But Dick told us if you do it right, you will develop empathy with the speaker. So empathic listening it is on Beyond Intractability. This kind of listening has all sorts of benefits that you can see listed here on this slide. It builds trust, interpersonal understanding, it engenders respect, it reduces tension and misunderstandings, and it surfaces important information and creates a safe environment for reconciliation and problem solving. The empathy part is very important to reconciliation, as is trust building and respect. Empathic listening lets the speaker know that you're interested in what they have to say, and that you understand their problem and how they feel about it. And very importantly, they know you are not judging them. And indeed, it's important that you don't judge them. You need to be open to what they are saying without judgment, though you don't need to agree with what they are saying or pretend that you do. Active listening encourages the speaker to express themselves openly and freely, without fearing interruption, criticism, or unwanted advice. When I was teaching undergraduate conflict skills at the University of Colorado, the university's ombudsman, Tom Sebok, always came to my class each semester and gave a workshop on effective conflict communication. He explained that active listening is a two-part process. The first part is hearing what the other person is saying, and the second part is demonstrating to the speaker that they have been heard and understood correctly. Tom described 4 skills that are necessary to do this: attending, paraphrasing, summarizing, and asking open-ended questions. Attending skills, he pointed out, differ from culture to culture. In Western cultures, paying close attention to someone usually means facing them, making eye contact, having attentive open body language, for instance, not crossing one's arms or looking at other things or other people, and making affirming sounds such as wow, tell me more, and so on. One should take care to avoid negative symbols like frowning, rolling one's eyes, yawning, and so on. Once the speaker pauses, the active listener will paraphrase or summarize in their own words what they heard the speaker say. This shouldn't be a complete parroting of the speaker. Tom always played a tape of someone who repeated every word back to the speaker, word for word, and as you can imagine, this elicited a very negative response. But if you start with some of the conversation starters listed on the right of the slide, such as, "So it sounds like you feel like you weren't treated fairly," using similar but not identical words to indicate that you heard and understood what the speaker said and meant, it usually either elicits a confirmation that you have it right or further clarification if you got it wrong. The only difference between paraphrasing and summarizing is that paraphrasing is done after a short period of time, a few sentences or less, while summarizing is a short summary of a long statement. This is useful if the speaker goes on for quite a long time without a pause. Lastly, Tom recommended listeners ask open-ended questions that can't be answered with a yes or a no. These tend to draw out more information, encouraging the speaker to elaborate about their concerns, feelings, and perspectives. They often start with a what or a how question. "Oh my gosh, what did you do then?" Or "How did that seem to you?" Sometimes they can begin with a why, but you have to be careful with whys because they can be seen as accusatory, as in, "Why in the world would you do that?" which can easily be interpreted as an accusation that whatever the person did was dumb. Tom also listed a number of other active listening banana peels, things that can slip you up. These include reacting defensively, "I didn't say that," debating, "Well, yeah, but if you had your facts straight," blaming the speaker, "But you're jumping to conclusions," making judgments, even privately, "What an idiot he is," or thinking up your comeback while you're ostensibly listening, or interrupting before the speaker has paused. One more important thing to say that people often misunderstand: active listening and empathic listening does not require you to agree with what the other person is saying. You can disagree, even strongly. But you can't say that and you can't argue. You need to listen and confirm that you understood what they said well enough that you both agree on what the speaker said and what the speaker meant. Once this agreement is reached, then you could go on to explain how you may see the situation differently. But even then, one should do so in a respectful, informative way, not in the sense of a debate which you are trying to win. Another important thing to do to improve conflict communication is to learn about and work to overcome our cognitive biases. We all have cognitive biases that both distort the way we take in information and how we interpret the information that we get. This cognitive bias codex is an amazing chart that lists 188 different known cognitive biases. The article describing the chart explains that these biases arise from 5 sources: information processing shortcuts, limited processing ability of the brain, emotional and moral motivations, distortions in storing and retrieving memories, and social influences. One of the best known and perhaps one of the most important biases that relates to the profound polarization of the current political environment is the confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret all new information as confirming that which we already know. If it actually does, we believe it and we privilege it in our personal data bank. And if it really doesn't, we twist it around in our minds so that we make it confirm what we already believe. Or we dismiss it as having come from an unreliable source or for other reasons to be misguided. Another example is the self-attribution bias. When things are going well for us, we tend to believe that it's our own hard work, ingenuity, and brilliance. When they're going badly, though, we tend to blame other people for our problems. Similarly, the fundamental attribution error attributes blame to others when they appear to do something wrong. But if we do something wrong, we put the blame on extraneous factors that caused us to make the mistake, due to no fault of our own. Although such biases are ubiquitous, we can address them successfully. The most important step is to know such biases exist. If we know all humans tend to distort information, we should challenge ourselves to think differently. When we receive new information that confirms our beliefs, look more closely. Does it really? If it disputes those beliefs, don't dismiss it outright. Examine it to see if it might be valid. Go further. Seek out information that goes against your pre-existing beliefs. Rather than jumping to conclusions about who is at fault for a problem, assume, as we discussed in the earlier video on de-escalation, that everyone contributed at least something, and then try to adjust what we're all doing to prevent the problem from happening again. Or give the other the benefit of the doubt. At least listen openly to their explanation about what went wrong and how to make it right. Since there are 188 cognitive biases, there are at least 376, that's 188 times 2, ways to adjust or counter them. We can't go into all of them here, obviously, but the bottom line for all of them is don't be too sure of yourself. Ask questions and seek more information from a diversity of sources before you make important decisions, and before you spread information further that might just contribute to our faked fact storm. At the same time, though, this is an interesting article from Charlie Wurtzel at the New York Times, who argues that we shouldn't go down what he calls the rabbit hole of critical thinking. He argues that the way we're taught from a young age to evaluate and think critically about information is fundamentally flawed and out of step with the chaos of the current internet. It's often counterproductive to engage directly with content from an unknown source, and people can be led astray by false information. The goal of disinformation, after all, is to capture attention, and critical thinking is deep attention. He goes on by quoting a digital literacy expert, Michael Caulfield, who said, "The natural human mindset is a liability in an attention economy. It allows grifters, conspiracy theorists, trolls, and savvy attention hijackers to take advantage of us and steal our focus. Whenever you give your attention to a bad actor, you allow them to steal your attention from better treatments of an issue and give them the opportunity to warp your perspective. The best way to learn about a source of information is to leave it and look elsewhere, a concept that is called lateral reading." Caulfield developed the strategy he called sifting: stop, investigate the source, find better coverage, and trace claims, quotes, and media to the original context. So whenever you read something from a source you're unsure about, he says you should stop, Google the source of the information, see what the internet says about it, read other sources on the same topic, and consider the consensus opinion before you come to a conclusion. So he's not really advocating we follow our cognitive biases without question. Rather, he's arguing that we check our sources by reading elsewhere rather than digging deeper into the original source. A related communication problem is the difficulty in distinguishing whether something that a person says is simply fact or their opinion. Very often people state things that are facts, but they actually are not. And even more often now, it seems, both sides of the political spectrum are accusing the other side of spawning fake facts. They don't believe anything that the other side says, regardless of whether it's true or not. Indeed, differentiating between true facts, fake facts, and opinions has become increasingly difficult, and some say it's impossible. The argument that there's no such thing as fact or truth, and that each person's truth is as good as the next person's truth, is widespread, particularly in university humanities and social science departments that believe in postmodernism. Although I haven't read deeply on the topic, it seems to me that in my own PhD field, sociology, along with philosophy, holds considerable responsibility for this idea, as we sociologists eagerly embraced postmodern philosophy as our theory of truth and objectivity. I tried to get a definition of postmodernism from some philosophy sources, and about the only thing I understood of what I read was that there was no agreement among philosophers about what the term meant. That's fitting, isn't it? So I turned to a much more readable source, Wikipedia. It says, postmodern philosophy questions the importance of power relationships, personalization, and discourse in the construction of truth and worldviews. Many postmodernists appear to deny that an objective reality exists, and appear to deny that there are objective moral values. Despite graduating from a field that believed that at the time, I have always rejected that notion. I do believe that there are objective facts. For instance, Biden did win the election, and statements from that Trump won are not equally valid. Likewise, I believe that COVID is a serious disease that has likely killed close to 500,000 people so far in the U.S., and statements that it is fake, I believe, are demonstrably not true. I'm guessing that most of my postmodern friends would agree with those assertions, and that they would accept that those are indeed empirically knowable facts. I was trying to find a parallel example of a fact that the right believes that the left doesn't, but which is empirically demonstrable, and I have to admit I had trouble, although I didn't spend a whole lot of time trying. Maybe one of my more conservative members of my class can help me. The closest I came to was what has been popularly called the success sequence, which is the assertion commonly made by conservatives that one can pull oneself out of poverty if one simply graduates from high school, gets a job, and only then gets married and last of all has kids. The data are pretty clear. If one manages to do things in that order, your chances of living in poverty is much lower. And that makes sense. Success in one area makes it easier to succeed in the next, and if you do it out of order, there's all sorts of extra problems. It's hard to get a good job without a degree. It's hard to finish school or hold down a job if you're a single mom without money for childcare. The problem with the success sequence, of course, is that it doesn't examine the reasons why people, particularly people of color, can't accomplish things in that order. And it's thought to imply blame where blame is not due. That takes us back to the importance of differentiating fact from values and opinions, and also correlation from causality. From all that I read, and I did read laterally following my own instructions above, there seems to be undeniable correlation between the following the success sequence and moving out of poverty. But is that causation, or are other things going on? For instance, are people able to move out of poverty for other reasons, such as being white, growing up in a two-parent household, having good teachers, etc., and then because of those factors they're more likely to be able to follow the success sequence? If that's the cause, then the success sequence has the causality order wrong. It's also frequently argued that the importance of the success sequence is an opinion held by many conservatives as they value its argument. They value hard work, marriage, and family. But it isn't a fact, critics will argue, that those are the factors that lead to success. I would have to do more personal research to be able to confirm whether the success sequence is indeed a fact or an opinion, simple correlation or causation. But if one is going to advocate policies based on such beliefs, one should do their homework first. And if one is to teach the success sequence as true, as opposed to an example of disputed facts, then one should also do more homework than I did here. All of the effective communication strategies described so far can be used by individuals themselves without the help of a third-party facilitator or mediator. Although it should be noted that mediators use empathic listening all the time. It's one of their primary tools to improve destructive conflict communication. The last small-scale communication strategy I want to talk about is dialogue groups. Groups which are led by facilitators to talk in depth about a controversial issue. I learned about dialogue from an organization that's now called Essential Partners, but they started out as a public conversations project, and many people still know them by that name. Early on, they explained to me that, in their view, dialogue was a structured conversation or series of conversations that was intended to create, deepen, and build human relationships and mutual understanding. PCP started out doing dialogues about abortion in Boston after an abortion doctor was killed, and many people on both sides of the issue thought things had gone too far and that there had to be a better way to advocate for either side. They did many dialogues with regular people, and then they also did one very high-profile dialogue with Boston leaders of pro-life and pro-choice movements. They met privately over the course of 5 years and then finally went public in an article in the Boston Globe talking about their experience and how they came to much better understand and respect the other side. Unfortunately, the article doesn't seem to be available on the internet anymore. But in the resources section of this page, you can find several interviews with Public Conversations Essential Partners facilitators who talk more about those early dialogues. One of the things that vividly stood out for me when I talked with PCP's folks was that they explained that no one changed their minds about abortion in those dialogues, but they did change their minds a lot about the nature of the people on the other side. PCP founder Laura Chasen told me, for instance, that one of her pro-choice participants called her up a year or so after her dialogue and told Laura that she'd gotten pregnant unexpectedly and was trying to decide what to do about it. She wanted to talk to some of the people that were in her dialogue group before she decided. And among those that she wanted to call were the poor pro-life people that she met at the PCP dialogues. She was still very much pro-choice, but she was turning to pro-life advocates before making her personal choice about what to do, because she now valued their opinions. Essential Partners now calls their process reflective structured dialogues, which they say are designed to disrupt destructive communication patterns and hold open, honest, constructive conversations about potentially diverse topics. To do this, they use what seems to some to be a very structured process where people are encouraged to talk openly in turn and listen actively to what others are saying. They are asked to reflect before speaking in order to avoid knee-jerk or defensive reactions, and they're encouraged to ask questions out of genuine curiosity to learn more about what a person was saying or thinking. This, of course, is simply good active listening, but it's hard to do when one is talking about highly emotional topics. It is necessary, Essential Partners folks point out, to be willing to be uncomfortable, confused, and suffer cognitive dissonance, another one of those cognitive biases, which means having two dissonant ideas in your head. That tends to be psychologically uncomfortable, and most of us avoid cognitive dissonance by twisting what we hear to make it what we already think. That's the confirmation bias we discussed before. But the Essential Partners process tries hard to prevent people from doing that. Their facilitators ask questions that help participants process what each other participant has said, enough to really understand it and understand why each person feels the way they do. That's PCP, or Essential Partners' goals, to discover what they call the heart of the matter, what the topic really means to all the participants and why they feel the way they do. The result of such understanding is the development of respect and trust of people with differing views, even when their views are opposite your own. In the early days, PCP used to stop there. They used to stress that they did not try to push people towards common ground because they thought the idea of common ground would scare people away. But they often did indeed find common ground during their dialogues. And now, as I read some of Essential Partners' newer materials, while they don't push for common ground at the start, they do seem more open to encouraging the development of it as they go further to help the participants begin to develop plans for working together collaboratively to enact those commonly held goals and ideas. Lots of other organizations now do dialogues too, although Public Conversations was one of the first. But it's now an essential tool for almost all peace-building and reconciliation work. This video too is running very long, so I'm going to stop here. Much more information about effective conflict communication is available on BI and on other places on the internet. I encourage you to explore them further. Thanks.